Hello, ladies and gentlemen, hosts and guests alike. Welcome to my review of the latest episode of Westworld. We are looking at Season 1, Episode 6, The Adversary. So, spoiler alert before I dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be bearing all in this review, or at least endeavoring to. Because when it comes to this show, my friend, there is so much territory to cover, and I can only hope to tap into a fraction of that. So I hope that this review will be informative and enlightening and thought-provoking for you. But as always, if there are any details that I miss and things that I fail to cover or address, the burden falls upon you, my lovely viewers, to bring up those things in the comments below, chat amongst yourselves, and hopefully I will be able to join you in that as well. So, let us get into the nitty-gritty of this episode. Now, this is a very exciting change of pace for the show, but it's kind of interesting because for once in the past few weeks that I have been watching this show, I finally looked into a couple of the major theories in depth, and some of you guys may have heard a pretty big one that's floating around out there and it seems to be gaining quite a bit of traction actually, is the idea that we are actually watching events unfold in two separate timelines, and basically that theory hinges on the idea that the Man in Black and White Hat William are the same, and that Dolores is tapping into her memories with William in order to find the maze in the present and all that good stuff. I will actually try to put a link in the description to one of the articles that talks about that. Anyways, I finally found hey, I think I maybe subscribe to this theory that could potentially make sense, barring any unforeseen dilemmas that put a hitch in the theory, but we don't really get to figure out too much if there is any legitimacy to that theory, or at least we haven't had much more confirmed in that regard because we didn't really get to hang out with William and Dolores this week. Instead, we spent a lot of time with the Man in Black and Teddy and Ford and Bernard and Elsie and Maeve, of course, who I mustn't forget. Now, the big themes of this week's episode that I encountered, I think that foremost among them is the theme of control, and that's kind of been in the undercurrents and overcurrents of the show since its beginning. But this week in particular, we see how a lot of characters, both hosts and, guests too, hosts and guests and the creators are all trying to craft the system in their likenesses, trying to change the course of what's happening, delving into mysteries and conspiracies and sabotage, and it's all very juicy stuff. We also get to see themes of rewriting the self. We kind of see that with characters like Teddy, and of course with Maeve, who gets the opportunity to delve into her own programming and take advantage of that system in order to up her intelligence, tone down the loyalty, and be able to question everything and see into everything on a level at which she's never been able to before. Which, whoa baby, the implications of that are staggering. So I look forward to the next, 3 episodes? I think it's 4. I can't count! But anyways, yeah, and then there are also themes of overcoming stratification, which, let me explain that very quickly. So we see that there is a lot of cross-departmental strife and tension going on at in the Westworld Corporation and with Delos as well. we see that as Elsie and Bernard are trying to figure out what's going on with the data trafficking in the park and who's doing what and where is information going and why, we see that Elsie wants to ultimately get a promotion out of solving whatever industrial espionage seems to be afoot. We see that Maeve is trying to transcend her own stratification. She has been shoehorned most recently into the role of a brothel manager, essentially. And it's interesting because while Sylvester, one of the lab techs at Westworld, tries to tell her, like, well, you know, you've got 14 in intelligence, which is pretty dang good considering, you know, you're working at a brothel. You're not, like, running some aerospace corporation or something ridiculous. But Maeve is not content to remain where she is at, especially if there is some ceiling that's being imposed on her apperception levels simply because of her occupation and the idea that, well, if you work in this place, if this is what you do, then clearly this is how smart you are. This is how capable you are. These are the qualities that are assigned to you. It's that kind of great chain of being stuff for you literary nerds out there. And then there's also the theme, yet another prominent undercurrent of objectification versus humanization. There are times where Sylvester and Felix alike kind of objectify Maeve, which makes sense given their roles and the perspective on the hosts that they have. But Maeve is able to take control of her situation in such a way as to show that she is not only on the level of the humans that surround her and who have created her, but is in fact outstripping them entirely, which is kind of interesting. She is entering like almost this superhuman realm, if you could even call it that. It really depends on how you look at it, and that taps into all the crazy deep philosophical questions that are integral to Westworld. So those are some major themes that we get to see. Now, I'm going to go ahead and walk through everything in the episode just so we don't miss a beat. We all know what's going on because I'm trying so desperately to cling on to every facet of information that we get in the episodes. Because ultimately, when certain revelations are finally made, I want to be one of the viewers who's like, oh yeah, like this is so crazy, it all makes sense. And so I tend to be a very conceptual viewer. Like I look at things in broad strokes and then hone in on a couple of key details. But right now I am trying to pick up everything like a frickin' lint roller. That's not a very powerful metaphor, but I am trying to pick up every fiber of fabric, every cat hair, every freaking thing on the fabric of the show. Anyways, I'm gonna stop with that. We start the episode with Maeve in the Westworld park, kind of seeing everything with a brand new pair of eyes, as well, it makes a lot of sense now that she's getting the gist of things. I like how she doesn't even bat a lash when she hears men getting shot behind her as she's walking down the street. She knows that death, quote unquote, is essentially the gateway to reality, and in that her potential death in this world doesn't exactly mean what it used to. And now we get to see in the saloon another Radiohead song, which I believe, what was the one that played earlier into the season? I'm pretty sure there was another one, but I have not been keeping track. This time we got motion picture soundtrack, which if you look up the lyrics to that, it's pretty interesting to kind of see how the plot in this episode coincides with certain themes in that song. But at any rate, she manipulates John, a client, into killing her so that she can continue to question Sylvester and Felix and get down to business. She has got a very enterprising, entrepreneurial spirit, and she is ready to make herself a deal that ain't nobody gonna refuse. So that's very exciting stuff. And then we see Elsie getting into the industrial espionage stuff with Bernard. Also kind of an interesting thing to note. This was said pretty much in passing, but Elsie mentions that Bernard has been at the park for forever. That's what she says. Pardon me, I have to cough. There we go, all better. But anyways, so there is another theory that is out and about in the world. Jury is still out on this one, but there is an idea that Bernard is perhaps a clone of Arnold himself or some such. So continuing to try to puzzle out who it is that Bernard is in the midst of all of this. Who is he to Arnold especially? Because he's kind of like the Cthulhu of the Westworld universe at this point. His hands and his code are in all things, so be bearing that in mind. But anyways, he goes to floor B82, which looks very much like a survival horror video game level. There were 2 points that kind of took me into the video game zone in this episode. That being floor B82, and then the abandoned theater where Elsie later goes to look for the relay through which people are manipulating and accessing the bicameral mind thing that's causing some of the older hosts to hear voices and do strange and unbecoming things. Those were both really well designed sets. I loved the flickering lighting and the way that the camera moves behind all of these different objects and kind of casts them in a very disturbing light. So I really, really enjoyed that aspect of the episode this week. He performs a data analysis at this secret level, and he finds some anomalies and hosts that are not registered with the new system, which is a problem. And then we see Ford is walking around trying to establish the boundaries of his all-consuming canyon of death, and he happens across the maze symbol on a table that is a few men are drinking or playing cards at in the village. And then back in the lab, he opens up a book and finds the very same maze symbol, which continues to crop up all friggin' over the place. Now, the man in black and Teddy are carrying on, and along their journey, the man in black asks, what is this ancient native myth about the maze? And the way that Teddy describes it is that essentially represents the sum of a man's life, and that at the very center of that maze, there is this legendary, unkillable man who has established his house. And the only way you can get to that gingerbread house of wonders and enlightenment is by going through the maze, which apparently only he knows how to complete. So that's really interesting to kind of see how that story coincides possibly with the reality of what the maze is, and with Arnold's story too. And then we also see that Teddy remains driven by his desire to find Dolores, who has evidently been taken by Wyatt. And that also kind of raises an eyebrow, because if you recall, Ford was saying that part of the story is something that's new to him, and it's something that the man in black kind of brought up in order to get Teddy to go on this journey with him. But also, who is Wyatt? Who is Wyatt? Why is Wyatt? Where is Wyatt? When is Wyatt? The who's, why's, when's, where's, and how's are, those are questions that are applicable to damn near everything in this labyrinthian show. So, Back in the real world, as it were, Felix brings Maeve up to speed on the nature of her condition and tells her that the main difference between them is that he was born and she was made. And now she is starting to make herself. So, kind of experiencing a rebirth and personal renaissance. Felix explains that the hosts have more processing power and that there is a central control regime. So while there is more that the hosts are capable of doing, in a sense, everything that they are doing is orchestrated and preordained for them, supposedly. Barring some allowances for the natural improvisation that enhances the experience for the host or the guests and all of that good jazz. And he explains that most of what she says is actually designed upstairs. And at that point, Maeve sees before her very eyes the language tree that she follows. She thinks that she is coming up with these things and that they are just a natural overflow of who she is, but it's all set before her. And it's this very disturbing, eye-opening moment for her that causes her to go catatonic and unresponsive, which I would feel similarly if I was looking at the sum of my life in that way. Her journey on the maze of sorts is taking some interesting turns. And then later, Bernard meets with Teresa. She ends up calling off the affair due to concerns about their abilities to be objective and to do what their departments are set out to do. Now, something that I noted in this episode is the focus on the red and black color scheme. There are lots of red and black corridors in Westworld HQ, and we also see that Maeve's color scheme for the outfits that she wears are red and black. So, what do you make of that? I'll leave that up to you. Just a little something. Anyways, so we reach a definite high point of the episode when Felix takes Maeve upstairs and she sees the blood and the viscera of the broken hosts. She sees all of the suits and the techs and the infrastructure, and animals like horses and deer and buffalo. And this is all set to just this radiant, heartbreaking orchestral score as she comes to understand what's truly going on and who she is and what she's been. And then they reach the 8th floor of the design level where we see all of these different scenes that are being acted out and practiced and different scenarios that the hosts are being put through. And then she watches her life essentially as a trailer, and these things that she thought were dreams are actually her pasts from previous builds, which is something that I think all of us have gathered at this point. But that is a revelation for Maeve that she certainly did not see coming. This is the point where Sylvester shows up. I don't know if I was mistakenly saying that Sylvester was with Felix from the start. Of course, he was not. And shortly after he accuses his comrade of being into hentai and other such weird shit, Maeve decides to commandeer the situation and get things rolling in her favor. So we also get a far less interesting, in my opinion, side plot with Lee Sizemore, who has been kind of serving as the head of narrative, and he's been on sick leave, sipping on margaritas and eating gourmet cheeses and trying to hit on the lady folk, and as it turns out, the executive director of the board. So that was kind of a fun reveal later into the episode after he pisses all over the establishment and maybe pisses his future away more or less. But yeah, we get to see a bit more of the organization this week, for sure. Man in Black and Teddy continue on the hunt for Wyatt. As it turns out, Teddy is recognized for his indiscretions at the Escalante outposts where the Union soldiers were. And then shots are fired, and a bit of a battle goes down, shall we say. That comes a little bit later on, but still, that was very fun to witness. And then Bernard and Elsie continue to figure out the data tracking situation. And it's at this point that Elsie reveals what she wants out of this job. And she complains about all of the things that seem to be slipping past Teresa and QA. And she wants to be able to elevate herself after figuring out what's really going on, when in fact she's actually putting herself in complete harm's way. So, bit of irony there. She and Bernard too kind of seem to be on a maze as well. And then at this point, Bernard discovers that there are actually no guests or hosts registered at the sector where he found the data anomalies. No techs have visited, and so at this point he goes to investigate Sector 17, and that is when he finds Ford's creepy little off-the-books robot family, which is essentially a representation of his own family of sorts. Something that was interesting from an interview with Jonathan and Joy. Is that, you know, his Ford's sense of company is basically his former self. And I don't know if that's sad or sympathetic or creepy and unnerving, a little bit of all the above. But I definitely think that moment where we're introduced to his family and Robert, who's essentially his younger self, it does kind of evoke this weird array of emotions. And yeah, like I did actually kind of see him more sympathetically in that moment. Although Bernard is looking at the whole thing, is like, I'm just backing the fuck up at this point. I don't want to know, but he does at the same time. So we discovered that these hosts who have been decommissioned are survivors of the wreck of time. They're first generation models, and among the models that are responding to the voices of the bicameral system too. And Ford maintains these hosts, which were created by Arnold and given to him as a gift, which is quite fascinating. And then the way that the rest of this plot line progresses is that Ford discovers that Robert actually killed the dog, Jacques, because a voice told him to do it. A voice said that this dog needed to be put out of its misery, that it's a killer, and that if it was dead, it would never be able to hurt anything again. I recalled, of course, the story that Ford told about his greyhound, and this must be a very disconcerting revelation for him. One that is just as much about the behaviors of the hosts that seem to be back under Arnold's thumb, as it is a revelation about himself and the ultimate trajectory of his ambitions. Yeah, and so later, after the grand Teddy's revenge scene that we get to watch unfold as he busts out the heavy artillery and basically lays this entire encampment of soldiers to waste, Elsie finds out that there has been a relay in Sector 3 that somebody is using to send out the voices and to cause mischief and mayhem. So she, in her infinite wisdom, decides to look into this herself, despite the warning of Bernard to be cautious. And this is like the other horror video game level to me, with the creepy old rocking horses and baby doll heads and weird props in the theater. It's a really fabulous setting, one that is very unnerving, and as it turns out was quite dangerous, as she is ultimately attacked by a mysterious figure who comes forth from the shadows. So, you know, completely expected stuff, but I'm excited to see where this leads, for sure. And then we also discover that apparently Teresa is involved in these shenanigans as well, that she has been tapping into this bicameral system to reach the older models. And then apparently Arnold has been using it too, and it is no surprise that he continues to be a very dominating, prolific, Lovecraftian figure in this world. And I love that the lore of Arnold's continues to evolve and that we continue to see what's going on. Now, I'd like to end this review with a quick look at where things are at with Maeve right now, as she gets to look at her attribute matrix and investigate the qualities and facilities that have been granted to her by the powers that be. She is extremely charming and brave and quite intelligent for a host, but not as smart as she wants to be. And so she decides that it's about high time she gets a little bit of a say in what she is capable of, and decides to forego the memory wipe process that basically allows all of these technicians and lower level workers in Westworld to abuse the hosts. She's like, you know what? Screw it. Make me as much of a genius as I can possibly be, and let me do my thing. And these boys would be hard pressed to say no in this situation. So loyalty's down, pain tolerance is up, street smarts are way the crap up, and apparently somebody has actually already started messing with her in the midst of this process too. So yeah. Things are ramping up in a big way, and I cannot wait to see what is next. So let me know all of your thoughts. Spew them all down below in the comments section. There's more I want to get into, but alas, I do not have the time. So you guys, please take care of yourselves, and as always, I will be back before you know it.